They mocked human diplomacy for 50 years. Then, they killed the wrong children. Before we close the file share, if you think their greatest fear is us being aware, enjoy the story. The command center on Glavron buzzed with the casual arrogance of 1,000 civilizations. Senior diplomat Malin Voss adjusted his ceremonial robes, all four eyes scanning the assembled delegates with practiced superiority. The Zeleri had perfected the art of diplomatic condescension over millennia, and today promised to be particularly entertaining. Order. Council President Zethara called, her crystalline voice cutting through the multilingual chatter. We convene this emergency session to address the humans. A ripple of barely contained laughter swept through the chamber. Humans, the galactic equivalent of children playing dress-up, stumbling through space with their primitive technology and laughable diplomatic protocols. Mylan's secondary eyes focused on the small delegation near the chamber's edge. 3 humans dressed in simple gray uniforms sat quietly taking notes, while chaos erupted around them. Ambassador Alina Rodriguez maintained that peculiar human expression, what they called a smile, as Councillor Vextoth loudly declared their mining rights administratively invalid due to clerical oversights. 50,000 human miners, 15 colonies, decades of legal operation, gone with a single vote. Rodriguez simply nodded, typed something into her primitive data device, and said, "The Human Federation notes this decision. We trust the Council maintains accurate records." Malin's scales rippled with amusement. Notes. They always took notes, these humans, as if their scribbled observations could somehow matter in the grand theater of galactic politics. What none of them noticed, what none of them could have imagined, was that those notes would become evidence. Evidence that would reshape the galaxy itself. But that revelation lay 50 years in the future, hidden behind humanity's most devastating weapon, patience. The Galactic Council had seen many species ascend to spaceflight. Most arrived with fanfare demanding respect through displays of military might or technological superiority. The humans had done neither. They'd simply appeared. One day their primitive vessels had materialized at the edge of Council space, broadcasting polite requests for diplomatic contact. No threats, no posturing, just 3 simple words. We come peacefully. Malin remembered that first contact session vividly. Ambassador Rodriguez had stood at the speaking podium, the same podium where Malin now delivered this testimony, requesting membership in the Galactic Council. Honored representatives? She had said that ever-present smile never wavering. The Human Federation seeks to contribute to galactic peace and prosperity. We offer our unique perspectives and capabilities in service of the greater good. Councillor Threxnall had actually snorted. Capabilities. You've barely mastered faster than light travel. Your ships are held together with what you call duct tape and hopes. Rodriguez had simply smiled wider. We prefer to think of it as resourcefulness. Sometimes the most elegant solutions appear simple. That should have been their first warning. The humans never defended themselves, never argued, never seemed offended by the casual dismissals. They just smiled, took notes, and said those 3 words that would haunt the galaxy. We note that. The Council voted to grant humanity provisional membership, a diplomatic fiction that meant they could attend meetings but held no real power. Mining rights, denied. Trade routes, restricted. Military representation, laughable. With each rejection, Rodriguez would smile, type something into her device, and deliver that same ominous phrase, "The Human Federation notes this decision." Malin's third eye twitched at the memory. They should have wondered why a species sophisticated enough to achieve interstellar travel seemed so content to be treated like children. They should have questioned why humans never seemed surprised by their treatment, as if they'd expected it. Instead, they laughed. The mighty Galactic Council representing 300 civilizations across 47 star systems, laughing at 3 humans in gray uniforms who took everything with smiles and notes. The laughter would stop soon enough. 50 years. For 50 years, the humans endured what could only be described as systematic humiliation. Trade agreements mysteriously amended at the last moment. Shipping lanes reclassified as restricted military corridors without notice. Their diplomatic protests dismissed as emotional outbursts from an immature species. Malin had witnessed it all, documenting each incident with academic detachment. The humans fascinated him in the way that primitive art might fascinate a sophisticated collector, charming in its simplicity, amusing in its limitations. Ambassador Rodriguez aged during those decades, her dark hair silvering at the temples, but that diplomatic smile never faltered. Neither did her habit of taking notes. The Proxima Centauri mining incident had been particularly educational. The Council had stripped humanity of mining rights to 4 asteroid belts, claiming administrative irregularities in their documentation. Councillor Vextoth had been especially creative in his cruelty, publicly questioning whether humans possess the intellectual sophistication necessary for proper paperwork. Rodriguez had stood at the podium, hands clasped behind her back, in that peculiar human gesture of patience, and simply said, "The Human Federation notes this decision. We trust all deliberations are being recorded for historical accuracy." Historical accuracy! Vextoth had laughed, his mandibles clicking with amusement. History is written by civilizations that matter human. Your contribution will merit perhaps a footnote. Rodriguez's smile had grown slightly sharper. Indeed, footnotes can be surprisingly important. They often contain the most interesting details. The trade route restrictions had followed the same pattern. 50 years of established shipping lanes suddenly became security corridors, forcing human merchants to accept 17 times higher transport costs through Mox-Terran space. The Council's Transportation Authority had presented it as a minor adjustment barely worth discussion. Surely, Commissioner Bechtool had sneered, "A species sophisticated enough for space travel can adapt to minor bureaucratic changes." Rodriguez had simply typed another note. "The Human Federation notes this adjustment. We find the timing illuminating." "Timing?" President Zithara had demanded. "Are you suggesting some conspiracy, human?" "Not at all, Madam President. We simply observe patterns. It's a useful habit for a species that values historical accuracy." That phrase again. Historical accuracy. As if their primitive records could somehow challenge the established order. The final insult had come during the terraforming rights hearings. 3 human colonies faced critical overpopulation, requesting expansion permits for nearby worlds. The Council had not only denied these requests, but fast-tracked luxury resort approvals for Mox-Terran development on 12 worlds in human space. Rodriguez had listened to the decision with that same diplomatic composure, but Malin's trained eye had noticed something new, a certain stillness in her posture, a particular quality to her smile. "The Human Federation," she had said carefully, "notes this decision with special interest. We want to ensure the Council's records are absolutely clear on the sequence of events and decisions leading to this point." Councillor Threxnell had actually applauded mockingly. "Such dedication to record keeping. Perhaps you missed your calling as galactic librarians rather than diplomats." Rodriguez's laugh had been like crystal chimes, beautiful and somehow dangerous. "Records are important, Counselor. They help establish precedent and consequences. The human delegate will not make threats," President Zithara had snapped. "Threats?" Rodriguez had seemed genuinely puzzled. "I'm simply ensuring accurate documentation. After all, we wouldn't want any clerical oversights when the time comes to review these decisions." Malen's scales had rippled then with the emotion he couldn't quite identify. Not fear. Humans were far too weak to inspire fear. But something. A sense that beneath Rodriguez's patient smile lay currents too deep to fathom. He should have trusted that instinct. The Starwalker had been humanity's pride. A research vessel designed not for war or profit, but to inspire wonder. Its hull bore no weapons, its cargo holds carried scientific instruments instead of trade goods, and its mission was simple conduct deep space studies while introducing human children to the majesty of the cosmos through their Young Explorers program. 27 souls aboard, each one carrying dreams and hopes and futures that stretched across decades. 8 of them children between the ages of 10 and 14 on their first voyage beyond Earth's solar system, their eyes wide with the kind of wonder that only the truly innocent could possess. Malen had reviewed the incident reports 1,000 times since each reading revealing new layers of horror that his sophisticated mind struggled to process. The facts were undisputed, recorded by multiple sensor arrays, confirmed by independent witnesses, cataloged with the bureaucratic precision that the Council demanded for all official incidents. The Starwalker had been conducting quantum field research in Sector 7 Alpha well, within approved civilian corridors, their permits properly filed, and their mission profile cleared through 17 different administrative bodies. The children had been in the observation deck writing reports about stellar formation for their school projects, their young voices echoing through the ship's corridors as they shared discoveries and debated theories with the passionate intensity that only children could bring to learning. The Mox Terran Patrol had detected them at 1437 Standard Time, their sensors painting the human vessel as a potential security threat despite every identifier screaming, civilian research mission. Mox Terran Patrol. This is the research vessel Starwalker. Captain Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the comm logs Malen had studied obsessively. We are operating under Research Permit Delta 7, studying quantum field variations in approved civilian space. Unknown vessel, you are in restricted military space. Power down immediately and prepare for inspection. There must be some mistake. Our navigation shows approved research corridors. We have children aboard conducting educational... The weapons fire had cut off the transmission. 27 humans dead. 8 of them children who had never seen a hostile act in their short lives. The Council's official response had been swift and dismissive. Unfortunate incident arising from navigational error. The vessel entered restricted space despite repeated warnings. While the loss of life is regrettable, responsibility lies with the human crew for inadequate navigation protocols. Malen remembered the emergency session vividly. The Council chamber buzzing with the comfortable certainty of bureaucratic justification. The Mox Terran delegation expressing sincere regrets while emphasizing their patrol ships' adherence to standard security protocols. Ambassador Rodriguez had requested to address the chamber. She'd walked to the podium with her usual measured steps, but something had changed. The diplomatic smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. Honored Council. She had begun her voice carrying an odd quality Malen had never heard before. The Human Federation has reviewed the incident reports regarding the Starwalker. The matter is closed. Human, Counselor Vextoth had interrupted. Tragic but clear. Your ship violated security protocols. Rodriguez had tilted her head slightly, a gesture that somehow seemed more predatory than submissive. I wonder if the Council would indulge a simple request. I'd like to play the final transmission from our research vessel, for the record. Unnecessary, President Zathara had declared. The facts are established. Humor me, Rodriguez had said, and there was something in her tone that made the chamber fall silent. After 50 years of patience, surely the Council can spare 3 minutes for a grieving member species. The holodisplay had activated, showing the Starwalker's final moments from internal security feeds. The children in the observation deck floating in zero gravity, laughing as they conducted their first space experiments, making notes about crystal formation in microgravity, trading jokes about reconstituted space food, young voices singing what they called an old space song about someone named Major Tom. Then the proximity alarms, the lights failing, the terror, but it wasn't the fear that had silenced the chamber. It was what came after. In the final moments, as the ship's hull began to breach, 12-year-old Amy Chen had pulled out a piece of paper, actual paper, an almost extinct medium among spacefaring civilizations, and begun writing frantically. What is she doing? President Zathara had whispered. Rodriguez's voice had been steady as a gravitational constant. She's writing a thank you note to the Council for allowing their research trip. The chamber had watched in stunned silence as a child facing death in the vacuum of space spent her final seconds expressing gratitude to the government that was killing her. Amy Chen's handwriting, shaky from oxygen deprivation and terror, had remained legible. Thank you for letting us see the stars. They're even more beautiful than we imagined. We hope our research helps everyone understand the universe better. Amy and the young explorers. The transmission had ended. Rodriguez had allowed the silence to stretch for exactly 30 seconds before speaking again. This note and 7 others like it were found in the wreckage. 8 children dying because of what you call a navigational error, spent their final moments thanking their killers. She had reached into her diplomatic pouch and placed something on the podium. Actual paper, slightly scorched but readable. This is Amy Chen's note. I thought the council should see it. For the historical record. Malen's 4 eyes had focused on the artifact, and something cold had crawled up his spine. Not just because of the note's contents, but because of what it represented. 50 years of human patience crystallized into 8 children's final acts of gratitude toward those who had murdered them. Rodriguez had stepped back from the podium, her diplomatic smile finally completely gone. The Human Federation notes this incident with particular interest. We want to ensure the Council's records are absolutely clear on what happened here today. Commander Nathan Chen arrived through the wall like an avenging angel stepping through the membrane between dimensions. Not through the chamber doors which had been sealed during the emergency session by security protocols that had never been breached in 300 years of Council history. Not through the diplomatic entrances which required proper authorization escort credentials and the kind of bureaucratic approval that took weeks to process. Commander Chen had simply blown a precise hole through 3 meters of reinforced crystal wall, crystal that had been grown in zero gravity over decades treated with molecular bonding agents that made it stronger than most starship hulls, and stepped through it like he was entering his own home. The explosion had caught everyone by surprise, except Malen now realized with growing horror Ambassador Rodriguez. She hadn't even flinched when the chamber wall erupted in a shower of crystal fragments that should have been impossible to shatter. She'd simply turned toward the breach with an expression Malen had never seen on a human face before, an expression that spoke of long planning and patient preparation for this exact moment. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something else entirely. Something that made his scales involuntarily darken with the kind of primitive fear that transcended species barriers and spoke to ancient memories of what it meant to be prey. "You're out of order!" President Zathera had shrieked, her crystalline voice cracking with shock that no amount of diplomatic training had prepared her for. "Guards security. This is an assault on the sovereign territory of the Galactic Council." But Commander Chen had walked through the settling debris with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the universe, each step carrying the weight of absolute certainty. His dress uniform was immaculate despite the destruction, each medal and ribbon precisely positioned according to human military protocols that suddenly seemed far more ominous than they had moments before. His face carried the same calm that Rodriguez had perfected over 50 years, but where hers had been diplomatic, his was something else entirely. Something that spoke of violence held in check by will alone. "The guards," Chen had said quietly, his voice carrying perfectly in the stunned chamber, "are indisposed." It wasn't a threat. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone one might use to mention the weather. "You will leave this chamber immediately," Zathera had demanded, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Something about Chen's presence had drained the certainty from the room. Chen had walked directly to the speaking podium, his boots crunching on crystal fragments. The assembled delegates, representing 300 civilizations across the galaxy, had simply watched. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody called for additional security. Later, Malin would analyze that moment obsessively. What had they seen in Chen's eyes? What had they sensed in his manner that had frozen 300 of the galaxy's most powerful beings into silent observers? Chen had reached the podium and placed both hands on its surface, his fingers finding the exact spots where Rodriguez had gripped it during 50 years of patient humiliation. "Play the footage," he had said. What footage? Zathara had managed. Chen's eyes had moved across the chamber, touching each delegate in turn. When they'd reached Malen, the Zalari diplomat had felt something he'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that he was in the presence of a predator that had chosen for the moment not to hunt. You know what footage. You've all seen it. You watched children die and called it a navigational error. You watched a 12-year-old girl thank you for the privilege of being murdered, and you filed it under regrettable incident. Chen had paused, his gaze settling on the Mox Terran delegation. Play the footage or I'll play it for you. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Somehow Commander Chen had gained access to the chamber's audiovisual systems. Somehow he'd neutralized the Council's security forces. Somehow this single human had turned the most secure facility in the galaxy into his own personal courtroom. The footage had played again, the children's laughter, their wonder at the universe, their final moments of gratitude and terror. But this time, Chen had provided commentary. This is Tommy Chen, age 10. He wanted to be a stellar cartographer. He died writing a thank you note to the council that funded his first look at a nebula. Another child's face. Sarah Kim, 11. She was documenting quantum field variations for her science project. Her final note thanked the council for the chance to do real science in space. One by one, Chen had introduced each child. Not as casualties, not as statistics, as individuals with dreams and personalities and futures that had been casually erased by bureaucratic indifference. "This is my daughter, Amy," he had said, finally his voice never wavering from that terrible calm. 12 years old. She wanted to follow her father into the diplomatic corps. She believed, absolutely believed, that the galaxy was filled with good people who just needed to understand each other better. Chen had reached into his uniform and withdrawn that precious artifact, Amy's handwritten note. She died believing that the people who killed her were fundamentally good. She thanked them for the privilege of being murdered. He'd placed the note on the podium with the same reverence one might show a religious artifact. "Let me be absolutely clear about what happened here," Chen had continued, his voice cutting through the chamber's horrified silence. "For 50 years, humanity practiced patience. For 50 years, we absorbed your contempt, your casual cruelty, your systematic humiliation. We did this because we believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence." Chen's hands had pressed against the podium, and Malen had sworn he could hear the crystal groaning under the pressure. That patience, that hope, it died with these children. They were the last of humanity's faith in your better nature. Their thank you notes were the final evidence of our species' capacity for forgiveness. The chamber had been silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems and the distant sound of what might have been weapons fire. "You called this an unfortunate incident," Chen had said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You said the deaths were regrettable, but ultimately their own fault for being in the wrong place at the wrong time." He'd lifted Amy's note, holding it so the entire chamber could see the childish handwriting. "This note, these children, this moment, they represent the death of human patience, and you have no idea what you've awakened." Rodriguez had stepped forward then, moving to stand beside Chen. For the first time in 50 years, her diplomatic smile had been replaced by something else, something that made Malen's blood run cold despite his sophisticated understanding of interspecies psychology. "The Human Federation," she had said, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies Malen hadn't known existed, "doesn't just note this incident. The Human Federation remembers." The silence stretched for 17 minutes and 34 seconds. Malen had counted every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every barely audible shift of fabric, as 300 representatives of galactic civilization struggled to process what they'd witnessed. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody dared break the spell that Commander Chen and Ambassador Rodriguez had woven around the chamber. Chen had simply stood there, Amy's note in his hands, allowing the weight of his words to settle into every corner of the vast space. Rodriguez remained beside him, her transformed expression serving as a mirror for humanity's fundamental change. It was Counselor Threxnal who finally broke. The same Threxnal who had mocked human record-keeping, who had suggested they'd missed their calling as galactic librarians. His voice, when it came, was barely recognizable. "Commander Chen," he had whispered, his usual confident mandible clicking, replaced by the stuttering speech of genuine terror. The Council expresses its profound regret for this tragedy. Perhaps we could discuss compensation." Chen's laugh had been like ice crystals forming in vacuum, beautiful, sharp, and absolutely cold. Compensation. He'd tested the word as if it were some alien concept. "You want to compensate me for my daughter's murder, for 8 children who died thanking their killers." Rodriguez had stepped forward slightly, her hand moving to rest on Chen's shoulder in a gesture that somehow managed to be both comforting and threatening. "The commander raises an interesting point," she had said, her voice carrying that new harmonic frequency that made the chamber's crystal walls vibrate sympathetically. What exactly would constitute appropriate compensation for the systematic murder of innocents? President Zathara had found her voice, though it cracked like thin ice under pressure. Perhaps we could review the security protocols that led to this unfortunate. Rodriguez had repeated the word with surgical precision. Interesting choice. Would you say it was unfortunate when the Council stripped our mining rights without justification? Unfortunate when you closed our trade routes to benefit your preferred species? Unfortunate when you denied terraform permits to prevent human overpopulation while approving luxury resorts in our space? The chamber had begun to stir as the implications became clear. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern, a 50-year campaign of systematic discrimination that had culminated in the murder of children. Malen had felt his perception of reality shifting like continental plates. The humans hadn't been naive victims stumbling through galactic politics. They'd been observers documenting every injustice, cataloging every insult, building a case that spanned 5 decades. The research ship Starwalker. Chen had said his voice, carrying across the chamber with the clarity of a death sentence, was carrying more than children. It carried video recordings of every council session for the past 50 years. Every casual insult, every dismissive laugh, every moment of contempt you thought went unrecorded. Rodriguez had smiled then, not her diplomatic smile, but something altogether more honest and infinitely more dangerous. The children weren't just conducting stellar research, she had continued. They were digitizing and transmitting historical records, our complete archives of the Galactic Council's treatment of humanity. Every decision, every justification, every moment where you revealed your true nature. The implications had hit the chamber like a physical blow. 50 years of carefully managed public images of diplomatic doublespeak, of maintaining the fiction that the Council operated through fair and impartial justice. All of it documented by the species they'd considered too primitive to matter. Where Councillor Vextoth had managed to croak, "Where are these recordings now?" Chen's smile had been terrible in its gentleness. Broadcasting on every civilian frequency across 47 star systems. Your constituents are watching 50 years of their representatives' true behavior in real time. The chamber had erupted, not in violence. Violence required courage, and courage had fled the room entirely, but in the desperate chatter of political animals suddenly confronted with accountability. "Turn it off!" President Zathara had screamed. "Stop the transmission!" "We can't," Rodriguez had said simply. The Starwalker's final act was to upload everything to our distributed networks. Quantum entanglement communication arrays ensure instantaneous transmission across the galaxy. Your actions are now part of the historical record of 47 civilizations. Malen had watched his colleagues' faces cycle through the stages of political death, denial, anger, bargaining, despair. They'd spent 50 years believing their treatment of humanity existed in a diplomatic vacuum, that their casual cruelty would never face scrutiny beyond council chambers. Now, their constituents were watching them laugh at human suffering, watching them dismiss murdered children as navigational errors, watching them reveal the casual racism and systematic oppression that had defined galactic politics for half a century. But it was Chen's next words that had truly ended the old order. The broadcasts aren't just historical documentation. He had said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. They're an invitation. Every species that has felt the Council's contempt, every civilization that has been dismissed as insufficient or primitive, every world that has been stripped of resources to benefit Council favorites, they're all watching. Rodriguez had nodded, her expression shifting into something that Malen would later recognize as the look of a hunter who had been playing with her prey for 50 years and was finally ready to feed. "The galaxy is learning that patience isn't weakness," she had said, "and power isn't defined by the ability to oppress those who choose not to resist." In the distance, alarm klaxons had begun to sound. Not emergency signals, something else. Something that spoke of fundamental change approaching at light speed. "What?" Zathara had begun, but Chen had already turned toward the hole he'd blown in the chamber wall. "That would be our fleet admiral," he had said conversationally. She's been waiting 50 years for permission to introduce the galaxy to humanity's true capabilities. Through the breach, the first ships had become visible against Glavron's starfield, not the familiar primitive human vessels the Council had grown used to dismissing. Something else, something that made the assembled delegates' worst fears seem like pleasant daydreams. Rodriguez's final words had echoed through the chamber as the old order died around them. Welcome to the Galactic War. Humanity's patience has officially expired. Fleet Admiral Mira Patel's face filled every screen in the council chamber, her bronze skin set off by the stark white of her naval uniform. Behind her, through the command deck's viewports, the assembled delegates could see what had once been humanity's merchant fleet, transforming into something that redefined their understanding of technological possibility. This is Fleet Admiral Mira Patel of the Human Federation Navy. Her voice carried across every communication frequency, every diplomatic channel, every emergency broadcast system in Council space. For 50 years, we have maintained what we call the Paperclip Protocol. She paused, allowing the confusion to settle before continuing with surgical precision. The Paperclip Protocol is named after an old Earth military saying, "Show your enemies a paperclip, keep the nuclear weapons at home." Her smile was Rodriguez's diplomatic expression, weaponized into something approaching art. Every ship you've seen until today has been deliberately outdated. Every weapon we've demonstrated has been intentionally primitive. Every technology we've shared has been carefully selected to appear manageable. Mullen's 4 eyes tracked the ships visible through the chamber's crystal walls. What had appeared to be humanity's familiar, unremarkable cargo vessels were shifting. The hulls seemed to ripple like heat waves over desert sand, revealing something underneath that shouldn't have been possible. The research vessel, Starwalker. Admiral Patel continued, her voice never wavering from that terrible calm, was carrying the children of our best and brightest, our diplomats, our scientists, our military leaders. They died writing thank you notes to the government that murdered them. Through the chamber's viewports, Mullen watched 300 supposedly primitive human ships shed their camouflage like snakes molting their skin. Where crude cargo haulers had been moments before, sleek destroyers now hung in perfect formation, bristling with weapon systems that didn't correspond to any known technology. "We are done," Admiral Patel said, each word falling like a hammer blow against the Council's collective consciousness, playing pretend. The first demonstration began without warning, without fanfare, without the kind of dramatic buildup that lesser species might have used to announce their power. One of the human ships, a vessel that had appeared unremarkable just moments before, fired something that wasn't plasma, wasn't laser, wasn't antimatter, wasn't any weapon type that the Council's military advisors recognized despite their combined centuries of experience across dozens of different technological paradigms. Space itself seemed to hiccup reality, stuttering like a broken hollow feed, experiencing quantum interference. The very fabric of existence appeared to pause, consider, and then simply decide that 20 MAX Terran patrol ships had never actually existed in the first place. Not destroyed in the conventional sense with explosions and debris and the spectacular death that spacefaring civilizations had grown accustomed to witnessing. Not vaporized by energy weapons that converted matter to plasma. Not reduced to component atoms by antimatter annihilation. They just ceased as if the universe had briefly reconsidered their right to occupy spacetime and filed a polite but firm objection to their continued existence. Localized space-time incursion weapons. Admiral Patel explained conversationally, as if discussing weather patterns rather than technology that could erase matter from existence with the casual ease of deleting a file from a computer database. We've had them for 37 years, though the theoretical foundation was established 64 years ago by a graduate student who was trying to solve traffic congestion problems on Earth. Amazing how simple the underlying physics becomes once you stop thinking of space and time as separate entities and start treating them as facets of a single malleable system that responds well to polite suggestions. Counselor Nazul had managed to find his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Stop, please. We understand your anger, but..." Anger? Admiral Patel's laugh was Rodriguez's crystal chimes weaponized into sonic warfare. "Oh, Counselor Nazul, you mistake us completely. We passed anger several decades ago. We've moved well beyond fury, transcended rage entirely. What you're witnessing now is something far more dangerous than human emotion. The second demonstration involved what Patel casually described as gravity sculpting. 3 human ships created a gravitational lens that converted an entire wing of the Mox Terran fleet into what she called interpretive art. Ships twisted into impossible geometries, their crews mercifully killed instantly by gravitational shear forces that would have taken hours to die from otherwise. We learned gravity manipulation 43 years ago. Patel continued, her tone suggesting she was discussing favorite recipes rather than weapons of mass destruction. Turns out, once you understand that gravity is just mass telling space-time how to curve it, becomes remarkably easy to suggest alternative architectural arrangements. But it was the third demonstration that had broken Counselor Nazul completely. A single human vessel had approached 60 Mox Terran destroyers and simply suggested they stop being coherent matter. No weapons fire, no energy discharges, no visible effect at all. One moment, 60 ships hung in perfect formation. The next 60 clouds of dissociated atoms drifted in graceful spirals, their constituent particles politely declining to maintain molecular relationships. Quantum coherence disruption. Admiral Patel explained with the patience of a professor addressing particularly slow students. We can selectively encourage matter to reconsider its commitment to existing in an organized fashion. It's surprisingly humanitarian. The crews experience approximately 0.003 seconds of confusion before their neural networks forget how to maintain electrochemical coherence. President Zathera had stood then, her ceremonial robes dark with stress secretions, her crystalline voice cracking like thin ice. Stop, please. The Council acknowledges its errors. We will make reparations. Full restoration of all mining rights, trade routes, diplomatic status. Oh, we're well past that now, Admiral Patel's image replied, her smile growing sharper with each word. You see, Madam President, you've made a fundamental error in your understanding of human psychology. The human fleet had begun moving then, not toward the Council's defensive positions, but around them surrounding the entire Glavron system, in a formation that somehow managed to appear both protective and threatening. You assumed that our patience was weakness. You assumed that our restraint indicated incapability. You assumed that our diplomatic composure meant we lacked alternatives. Another squadron of Mox Terran ships had tried to break through the human perimeter. They'd vanished so quickly it looked like a video skip there one moment and gone the next, leaving only empty space and the fading echo of gravitational waves. What you failed to consider, Admiral Patel continued, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the chamber's crystal walls resonate like musical instruments, is that patience, true patience, is the luxury of those so powerful they can afford to wait. We have been patient with you for 50 years, not because we feared you, but because we hoped you might eventually prove worthy of our restraint. The implications had settled over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. 50 years of human submission, 50 years of diplomatic humiliation, 50 years of systematic oppression, all of it voluntary, all of it a choice made by a species that could have ended the Galactic Council at any time. But you killed children, Admiral Patel said, and for the first time genuine emotion colored her voice. You murdered innocents who died thanking you for the privilege of being killed, and that, Madam President, is where humanity's patience reaches its absolute limit. Malen had realized then what truly terrified him. Not the weapons, not the ships, not even the casual demonstration of technologies that shouldn't exist. It was the absolute certainty in Admiral Patel's voice that humanity was still exercising restraint. This overwhelming display of power was them being merciful. Now we're going to have a very detailed discussion about restructuring this council. Admiral Patel continued, her diplomatic smile returning in full force, about fair representation, about accountability, about the consequences of actions, and you're going to sit quietly and listen. Her image leaned forward slightly, and somehow the gesture carried more threat than entire fleets of conventional warships. Because humanity's patience, humanity's restraint, humanity's diplomatic courtesy, that was the only thing protecting you from humanity's power. And you just killed it, along with 8 children who died, believing you were fundamentally good people. The chamber had fallen silent except for the soft hum of life support and the distant sounds of what might have been the old order of the galaxy collapsing. "Welcome," Admiral Patel said, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability, "to the new galactic paradigm. Class is now in session." The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 6 minutes and 17 seconds. Malen had timed it obsessively in the years since replaying the tactical recordings, with the desperate focus of someone trying to understand how reality itself had been rewritten. It hadn't been a war. Wars implied some possibility of resistance, some chance of victory through strategy or courage or superior numbers. What occurred around Glavron had been something else entirely, a demonstration. A lecture delivered in the language of applied physics to an audience that had never imagined such vocabulary existed. The Council's combined fleets, 10,000 ships representing the military might of 300 civilizations, had lasted less time than it took most species to complete their morning rituals. Admiral Patel had been efficient, clinical, almost bored. First lesson. Her voice had carried across every communication frequency as human ships moved through council formations like predators among prey animals. When fighting a species that has mastered gravity manipulation, traditional three-dimensional tactics become quaint historical curiosities. The Vraxian battlecruisers had learned this first. Their pride of the fleet dreadnoughts had simply folded in on themselves as local gravity wells convinced their hulls that flat was a more aesthetically pleasing arrangement than ship-shaped. Second lesson, energy shields become counterproductive when your opponent can encourage the quantum fields that maintain them to pursue other career opportunities. The Helican defense grid had discovered this truth when their supposedly impenetrable energy barriers had spontaneously decided to exist in different dimensions, leaving their ships naked to weapons that redefined the concept of overkill. Third lesson. When an enemy possesses the ability to edit the universe's opinion about whether your atoms should remain in close association, numerical superiority becomes statistically irrelevant. The lesson had been delivered via the complete dissolution of the entire Mox Terran fleet. Not destruction, dissolution. 3,000 ships and their crews had been gently encouraged to exist as individual particles, rather than collective entities, their consciousness ending before their neural networks could process what was happening. By the time Counselor Nazul had screamed surrender, the demonstration was already over. 10,000 ships reduced to stellar debris, floating artwork, or simple atomic soup. Not one human vessel had sustained damage. Admiral Patel had accepted the surrender with the same calm professionalism she'd shown while rewriting the laws of physics. Excellent. Now we can proceed to the educational portion of today's curriculum. The political restructuring had taken 6 days of intensive negotiations, though negotiations was perhaps too generous a term for what amounted to humanity, dictating new terms to a galaxy that had no choice but to accept them. The old council chamber had been demolished, not by weapons, not by explosives, but by a single human engineer who had politely requested that its quantum foundation consider adopting a more distributed architectural arrangement. The building had obligingly relocated itself across several square kilometers of Glavron's surface, its molecules cheerfully dispersing in accordance with humanity's gentle suggestion, leaving behind only the podium where Ambassador Rodriguez had delivered 50 years of patient warnings. The new council convened in a temporary facility hastily constructed by species eager to demonstrate their newfound appreciation for human engineering suggestions. The architecture was deliberately humble, functional, rather than grandiose, built to serve rather than intimidate. Every surface was transparent, every meeting room open to public observation, every decision recorded and broadcast in real time to populations across 47 star systems. The first session had been educational in ways that would haunt diplomatic academies for generations to come. Ambassador Rodriguez presiding that diplomatic smile, now carrying teeth that gleamed like polished obsidian in the chamber's carefully calibrated lighting. Her hands rested on the same podium where she had endured decades of systematic humiliation, but her posture spoke of transformation of patience finally rewarded with the power to reshape reality itself. The first order of business, she had announced to the assembled representatives, those who had survived humanity's physics lesson and chosen cooperation over extinction, is the establishment of new protocols governing council behavior. These protocols are not suggestions. They are not recommendations. They are the foundational principles upon which this new galactic order will operate. The protocols had been comprehensive, devastating, perfectly reasonable in the way that only absolute power could make something reasonable. All council decisions must now pass what humanity had designated the Starwalker test. Would this action protect the innocent? Does this policy serve the many or merely the privileged few? Would you be comfortable explaining this decision to a child who died, thanking you for the privilege of being murdered? Every session would begin with a moment of silence for the Starwalker's children, a reminder Rodriguez had explained of the price of arrogance. All deliberations would be recorded and broadcast in real time to every member civilization's population. Transparency humanity had suggested seemed like a reasonable expectation for a governing body. Any council member found guilty of systematic discrimination, resource theft, or casual genocide would be subject to what humans called educational intervention, a euphemism that made every surviving delegate's blood run cold. But the most devastating protocol had been the simplest, every council decision. Rodriguez had announced, her smile growing sharper with each word, must be written in language simple enough for a child to understand. If a policy requires complex justification, bureaucratic doublespeak, or diplomatic circumlocution to defend it probably shouldn't exist. She had paused, allowing the implication to settle like radiation in a shielded chamber. After all, we wouldn't want any more clerical oversights leading to the murder of innocents. The old order had died completely in that moment. 50 years of systematic oppression, casual racism, and bureaucratic cruelty had been replaced by something far more terrifying to the Council's surviving members' accountability. Humanity had revealed their true nature not through conquest, but through competence, not through domination, but through the establishment of systems so perfectly just that resistance became morally impossible. They demonstrated their power not through destruction, but through restraint, proving that the greatest strength lay not in the ability to harm, but in the wisdom to heal. They'd proven their superiority not by elevating themselves, but by creating structures that protected everyone, even those who had shown them nothing but contempt. Malen had survived the transition, though his role had changed dramatically from the heights of diplomatic influence to something far more valuable witness. From senior diplomat of a major galactic power architect of policies that had shaped the destiny of billions, he'd become what humans called a historical witness. One of the few beings who had observed humanity's complete transformation from apparent weakness to undeniable strength, from patient submission to benevolent dominance. His testimony recorded in the ruins of the old council chamber, as human ships held their eternal vigil around Glavron's transformed sky, had become required viewing for every species seeking council membership. A warning carved in quantum crystal, a lesson written in the language of consequences, a promise that echoed across the galaxy that justice delayed was not justice denied, merely justice gathering strength. To any civilization that encounters humanity in the future, Mullen spoke to the recording crystal, his 4 eyes reflecting the lights of the human fleet, like stars reflected in dark water. Understand this fundamental truth. What you perceive as patience is not weakness. What appears to be diplomatic submission is actually restraint of the highest order. What seems like technological inferiority is camouflage maintained by choice rather than necessity. He paused, gathering his thoughts, as explosions bloomed in the distance, the old orbital defense platforms being gently encouraged to relocate themselves to more environmentally sustainable configurations. Humanity possesses the power to reshape reality itself at the quantum level. They can encourage matter to forget how to exist, convince gravity to rearrange itself according to aesthetic preferences, and suggest to the universe that the laws of physics might consider alternative employment opportunities. Their technology operates on principles that our greatest scientists are only beginning to comprehend, built upon theories that our most advanced civilizations dismissed as impossible. A larger explosion lit the chamber, casting dancing shadows across the crystal walls. But their greatest weapon isn't technological, it's moral. They have proven that true civilization isn't measured by the ability to destroy your enemies, but by the strength to choose not to. They have shown us that real power lies not in domination, but in the creation of systems that protect the innocent. The recording crystal flickered, its quantum matrix struggling to process the gravitational waves from humanity's ongoing demonstration. The galaxy has learned at terrible cost that patience is not a sign of weakness, but a luxury of the powerful. Humanity waited 50 years for us to prove worthy of their restraint. We failed that test completely. Mullen straightened his ceremonial robes one final time, his scales rippling with emotions that had no names in any known language. But they are giving us another chance. Not because we deserve it, but because that is what civilized beings do. They protect the innocent, nurture the weak, and offer redemption to those who have proven themselves capable of growth. In the distance, the last of the old order's defensive installations quietly ceased to exist, their atoms politely declining to maintain structural relationships. To future species who join this galaxy, Mullen concluded, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Remember this. When you meet humanity, you will see kindness. You will see patience. You will see a willingness to compromise and accommodate. He paused, allowing his final words to carry the full weight of prophecy. But never ever forget what lies beneath that patience. And never, under any circumstances, harm their children. The recording ended as Admiral Patel's voice echoed across Glavron's transformed sky. Reconstruction complete. The new galaxy is now open for business. And in the silence that followed, 8 children's laughter could be heard in the quantum foam itself, their final thank you notes having become the foundation of a universe where such innocence would never again be betrayed. The Scifi stories of human patience had ended. The legends of human justice had just begun. The galaxy learned that day that true power isn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It's the strength to choose not to. Humanity's greatest victory wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was proving that civilization means protecting the innocent even when those innocents belong to species that have shown you nothing but contempt. If this story of patience, power, and redemption moved you, if you felt the weight of those children's final thank you notes, then you understand why these tales matter. Like and subscribe for more stories that explore what it truly means to be civilized in an uncivilized universe. And remember, sometimes the greatest mercy is pretending to be weak until someone crosses a line that should never be crossed. What would you have done in humanity's place? How long would your patience have lasted? Let us know in the comments below.